The Failed Project of Civilization. This essay is really addressing ethical questions pertaining to the built environment, that's to say, how society might organize itself architecturally. How ought we to live? What models help us best to flourish as human beings? I observe that for many that question has been put to rest. The city is the best model for human flourishing, and all energies should be directed to refining it. I don't take the aforementioned position as a given, and contend that there may very well be value in revisiting the few basic structures of societal self-organization, some ancient, others more recent. Brace yourself for the anecdotes. Here they come. The ascetic. Either the hermit, or perhaps the solitary frontiersman who lives in near isolation, living off the land, so to speak. The monastery creates a brotherhood of ascetics, who, though sharing certain tasks in common, reserve much time for isolation and quiet contemplation. All right, where to begin? Well, not at the beginning, but in my 20s. For 7 years, I took a vow of poverty and lived as an ascetic, my daily concerns being studies of linguistics, ethics, and aesthetics. Particularly the latter being my personal interest, I could be rightly called an aesthetic ascetic, as it were. As a young man, I was relieved of the pressures of raising a family, acquiring debt, managing property, climbing a corporate ladder, building a business, or otherwise establishing my turf in a commercial enterprise. Yes, there were rules and obligations. However, my experience of the monastic was that this conformist aspect of the life was light, just enough for cohesion of the brethren. I've never since had as much time to simply think and personally develop. The tribe. Hunter-gatherers and foragers are the oldest form of society and continue to persist, though to an ever-shrinking degree, to the present day. Civilization just hates the tribe, plain and simple. As is well recorded, Europeans flooded the planet from the 15th through 18th centuries, conducting an unrelenting pogrom of improvement. They encountered pre-existing cultures along the way: Islam, Incas, Chinese, Indian, etc. They didn't care for them much with their pagan, primitive ways, but at least they could respect them at some level as proto-civilized. They had cities and rules of law, after all. However, when they reached Africa, North America, and Australia, were they in for a shock? Bloody tribes. These people lived and died, leaving virtually no mark on the land. The human being living as an animal, how unbecoming. For the enlightened adherents of cogito ergo sum, this just did not compute. I was born in Manhattan, the heart of arguably the world's first mega-region, stretching from Boston down to Washington, D.C. Nevertheless, I spent my summers at my family's property in Jamaica, West Indies. Millbank was a little place deep in the tropical rainforest, at the end of the road leading up from Kingston into the Blue Mountains. No phone, no electricity, no plumbing, no problem, man. It was a village, but retaining many characteristics of tribal life. One bathed in the river, cast nets for fish, caught rock shrimps too, foraged for produce and game in the bush, as well as for medicinal leaves and roots. The local folk would go off into the jungle for days on end. Little use for money, no law, no codes, and consequently no criminals. Your only responsibilities were to one another, simple and free. That way of life is over, like a fading dream. The 4G service there is better than Charleston. Millbank has been transformed into a distant, impoverished outpost of a civilization upon which its denizens now passively depend. The village. A sedentary development of the tribe. familial groups who stay put by establishing agricultural and husbandry practices. I recently returned from a traditional plasters gathering in the village of Llangors, Wales. Flying over the Welsh countryside en route to landing in Cardiff, one can't help but notice the lovely plots of land set aside for cultivation and grazing, interspersed with forest, as well as small villages connected by country lanes. Not at all unlike a neural network, you get the palpable feeling the fabric of this society is quite literally sentient and very much a thriving living organism. Similarly, I had the experience last summer of working in Hubristic, literally village of the hound, in the middle of nowhere, Germany. Hubristic was situated in a similar pattern of concentrated village development, with adjoining agricultural lands and forests that had slowly accreted over millennia. As these villages would grow to a state of maturity, they would divide like a cell and form a new, largely self-sufficient familial group at a distance away no more than a 2-hour walk. And so around Hubristic you have in a radial fan Ackendorf, Rotmeleben, Nordgermersleben, Berbetal, and Supplingen, each with its own distinctive, if related, character, culture, and history. Modernity has pressed upon them all, imposing good or ill the legal and transportation infrastructure of contemporary life. Nevertheless, I admire the persistence of the locals to live off the land, eat from their gardens and with the seasons, continue to make their own building materials, then build according to their traditions, refuse credit cards, and avoid even cash when possible in lieu of barter. For the kids, the next generation being English speakers, as beneficiaries of a standardized education courtesy of the European Union, these are just nostalgic fetishes of their cute but backwards parents. They're all European now. The city. Something altogether different from the village. The city is characterized by strict hierarchies, rules of law, property rights, and division of labors. Most towns share these characteristics and can be classified as small cities. The city is a rather recent phenomenon among human society, perhaps dating back at the most some 8,000 to 9,000 years. For sure, villages go back much further. However, as I've been enlightened by a colleague who is writing a book on city planning, a city is most definitely not an overgrown village. Ancient cities weren't grown at all. Rather, they were manufactured whole cloth with religious, legal, and economic infrastructure, accompanied by a rationalized plan, that is to say, an urban layout. Who made these first cities? The best I can tell, tyrants. The city is possible because of institutionalized systems of coercion, by force of violence enforcing a culture of subjugation, dependence, and passivity, maintained in successive generations by indoctrination of rule of law and respect for authority. In a word, slavery. Admittedly, there have been these intractable problems from the inception of the city, but the case is continually made that the city is a worthwhile project after all. Look how much culture it has brought humanity. You don't get opera in a tribe or Michelangelo in a village. The highest of highs, such pinnacles of human achievement. Inspiring values worth almost any sacrifice. But from whom? Democratic Athens struggled with this question. By Athenian democracy, I mean property-owning males, about 10%. Women, foreigners, and slaves, you know, the folks who actually did all the work, didn't count, because after all, work is demeaning, subhuman. A group of the citizens felt democracy was all wrong. The enfranchisement of 10% was already too broad. The unlearned it gave voice to interfered with the realization of the ideal polis, where the good, the just, and the beautiful were recognized as three expressions of a single guiding universal ideal. The beautiful city is a just city. A just city is a good city. A good city is a beautiful city. If you are committed to the city project as your model of human flourishing, I guess its perfection is perhaps a reasonable quest. You're committed, after all, and that's the nature of commitment. However, from someone like myself who makes no such commitment, it reeks of romanticism. No, not the 19th century aesthetic movement, but hearkening all the way back to classical Greece and Rome, Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero. When has the West, or anyone else for that matter, ever produced anything even approaching a good, just, and beautiful city? Athens? Rome? Paris? London? New York? It's a delusion, a fantasy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the ideals of the good, just, and beautiful as being among the guiding lights for human flourishing. I just observe that the city has never been the appropriate societal vehicle for such development, rather its impediment. The mega-region. The absorption of cities into huge swaths of development, forming blocks that are in a fierce economic competition with one another in a single global market. Cities were horrible places for most people. Running them required armies that acquired and policed slaves, serfs, or similar peasant rabble, the only volunteers being the most vulnerable and desperate outside populations who, otherwise facing starvation, were compelled to prostitute themselves as medics or indentured servants. Unsurprisingly, the city was the minority form of societal organization. Up until as late as 1800, less than 3% of the world's population lived in cities, although it must be admitted that the outstretched influence of the city was already vigorously on the rise. Today, over half the world's population lives in cities, a startling 75% in the West. Who doesn't physically live in the city lives according to the prescriptions of the larger megaregion. The megaregion is the metastasis of the city, spreading everywhere like cancer. It is militarily intolerant of any independent form of societal self-organization. Totalizing, the megaregion reaches out into the most far-flung reaches of desert, tundra, and jungle, to the most isolated tribe and village, civilizing them, excising conformity and dependence by rule of law. When I was a child, I had a vision for world unity. I thought how wonderful it will be when everyone has electricity, everyone has a car, everyone speaks English, everyone becomes the same, because they're just like me. I think I can be forgiven for that. It was the thinking of an undeveloped, immature child. As humanity faces impending ecological crisis, the depletion economies and nihilistic behavior of the megaregions are stamping out remaining solutions embedded in thousands of years of accumulated tradition, culture, and language, literally humanity's collective ability to think, in favor of an imposed universality. The fact that megaregions such as Toronto, Dubai, and Peking are converging in the ways that they look and function is not evidence of progress. It's evidence of tremendous loss, resulting from infantile thinking. So the questions arise. Is this state of affairs inevitable? Is this human evolution, progress, towards some yet undetermined end? Who's to say for sure? Maybe it is. I have my biases, but I'm not insisting that the tribe and village are better than the city. Personally, though, I don't like having all my evolutionary eggs placed in the mega-regional basket without my consent. Just as we make room for national parks, protected species, there may be some wisdom in making a place for other forms of human society, uncivilized as they may be. Civilization can afford this, and the price our species may have to pay for not doing so might be too much to bear.